It will come to order. Are there any senators in the chamber who wish to vote or change their vote? If not, on this vote, the yeas are 52, the nays are 48. The nomination of Amy Coney Barrett of Indiana to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States is confirmed.
Right, as you just saw, Amy Coney Barrett has officially been confirmed as an Associate Justice to the Supreme Court of the United States. Barrett received 52 votes to 48 votes. She is President Trump's third successful Supreme Court nominee. Senate Democrats staunchly opposed the quick pace of the nomination process, especially 1 week before the presidential election. Barrett's confirmation will now give the court a 6-3 conservative majority. Joining me now are Caitlin Huey-Burns and Alan Jenkins. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter, and Alan is a professor of practice at Harvard Law School. Welcome to you both. Caitlin, let me start with you. Amy Coney Barrett was nominated just 1 month ago. How unprecedented was this confirmation process?
Well, what's striking about the vote tonight is that she received no bipartisan support. All of the Democrats voted in unison against her, and one Republican, Susan Collins, who is facing a very tough re-election fight in Maine for her Senate seat. Democrats have argued that this process has been unfair. They point back to the appointment of Merrick Garland, who did not receive a hearing. Republicans, however, have argued that this is the consequence of elections, that the president has the right to nominate a Supreme Court justice, and because they control the Senate, they control the procedure, and they said that this is their duty to advise and consent, and this is essentially what happened. So very unique insofar as she received no bipartisan support, and that shows you kind of how polarized these nomination fights have become, especially in an election year when over 50 million people have already voted.
Well, Alan, Democrats could take the Senate majority in the upcoming election. What are you hearing about the possibility of adding new justices to the Supreme Court or at lower court levels?
Well, Vice President Biden has appointed, or says that if he wins, he's going to appoint a bipartisan commission to study the question. I think it's a significant possibility. There's going to be tremendous pressure. I think, when President Obama nominated Judge Merrick Garland, Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham said, well, 8 months before an election is too little time. Now they're confirming a justice with 8 days before an election when people are voting. And so I think they've changed, the rule they announced that eight months is not enough to, if you can confirm your nominee, then you should. And in fact, you must. And so I think Democrats are going to take that message to heart. We'll see what Vice President Biden does if he's elected. But I think the idea is going to be very much in play.
So, Caitlin, let's talk a little bit more about this notion. There was some evasiveness, Joe Biden's critics have argued, when it comes to this issue of potentially expanding the Supreme Court. What might be behind that? What kind of pressures is the Biden-Harris ticket sort of under with respect to this particular issue of expanding potentially the Supreme Court?
Right. Well, this issue started to come about in the primary, again, in response to Merrick Garland, where a lot of Democrats in the base of the party wanted some action on this. And the idea of court packing or expanding the number of seats on the Supreme Court started to have some traction. And several candidates running for president either embraced the idea or said that they would be open to it. One of them, of course, was Kamala Harris, who said that all ideas should be on the table while she was running for president herself. Joe Biden has been under pressure from the more progressive wing of the party to take some kind of action. But over the past few months, he didn't directly answer the question, which was striking because during the primary, he really differentiated himself from his Democratic rivals by not taking the bait on some of these litmus tests. He did not embrace some of the things that other Democrats had been advocating for. But now that he became the nominee, he was facing this pressure from the left flank, but also not wanting to deliver a clear answer on it because he doesn't want to alienate any moderate voters or even Republicans that he's trying to court over to his side. So he was kind of evasive, certainly, and kind of made this into a bigger issue by not answering the question. In his 60 Minutes interview with Norah O'Donnell last night, he said that he would like to establish a bipartisan commission that would take 180 days to study this issue and that they would come up with recommendations. Some more news today. He answered some questions from reporters on the tarmac. He said that he was not open to term limits for Supreme Court justices. That was something that was discussed within the primary process as well by some of the candidates, adding term limits to justices. Joe Biden said today that he doesn't agree with that these are lifetime appointments and should stay that way. It's important to note that Joe Biden, of course, has experience with this issue very specifically because he was chair of the Judiciary Committee while in the Senate. So his roots have been kind of the traditional institutionalist mode, but now we see that he is facing pressure within his own ranks of a Democratic Party when you have this pressure building to take some kind of action in the Supreme Court.
Well, Alan, two major court cases are on the docket in November. One involves LGBTQ rights. The other will decide the fate of the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. How will Justice Barrett's addition to the Supreme Court impact these cases?
Well, we don't know for sure, but there's every reason to think that now Justice Barrett will, look askance at the Affordable Care Act. In other words, vote to strike it down and potentially to strike the entire act down. In fact, President Trump told us that was one of the reasons why he nominated her or any judicial nominee and why he wanted to get her on the court in time. And all indications are that that's her view. The other case is about the rights of same-sex or LGBTQ couples in foster care. This is briefly a case in which the city of Philadelphia contracted with Catholic Social Services to provide foster care. Catholic Social Services signed an agreement with the city saying that they would abide by anti-discrimination provisions, including regarding sexual orientation and identity. And then they began to refuse to certify same-sex couples for foster care. And so the city said it was going to terminate their contract. The Catholic Social Services sued under the religion clauses of the First Amendment, and that case is now coming up before the Supreme Court. And again, there's real reason to believe that now Justice Barrett will be an opponent of, or supportive in this instance, of Catholic Social Services claim, which, several years ago, and certainly with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the court, would have been a pretty straightforward decision, in my view, upholding Philadelphia's right to terminate a contract like this. Because after all, what if a religious provider says we won't place interracial couples, children with interracial couples, or with people of a particular religion? It can't be, one would expect under the court's past precedent, that that's constitutionally protected. And yet there's reason to think that Justice Barrett may think otherwise.
And Alan, there's been, of course, a lot of discussion about Roe versus Wade. Is it clear what might lie ahead for Roe v. Wade?
Before the Supreme Court, it is never 100% clear what's going to happen, or it wouldn't need to go to the court in the first place. But again, President Trump has said he would only nominate potential justices who would vote to overturn Roe versus Wade, who did not believe that women have a fundamental right to control their own bodies under the Constitution and protection from government encroachment, and everything on Justice Barrett's record, including her personal views, indicate that she is hostile to Roe versus Wade. So I think we should expect that at the very least, she's going to be voting to chip away the protections that Roe provides. And ultimately, she's going to be on the court for a long time, may well vote to overturn Roe versus Wade entirely.
Caitlin, how does Joe Biden plan to tackle this issue if elected? Have we heard a lot from him about this?
Well, one of his proposals is to codify Roe v. Wade, to pass a law to make it the law of the land. That is something that he has supported and something that has gained support among Democrats. This is becoming a key issue for Democrats. And the biggest question I have is whether the Supreme Court and this nomination starts to galvanize Democrats the way that it has traditionally galvanized Republicans. Republicans over the past several decades have done a good job at making Supreme Court the Supreme Court and judicial appointments across the country a key organizing principle for the party. They've developed a long list of judges. President Trump, then candidate Trump, had a list. They have an infrastructure to put forward lists. Democrats haven't really had that infrastructure. So does this nomination change the game for Democrats in terms of making this a organizing principle for their side? We've seen that this has shown, the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett has shown to be a huge fundraiser for Democrats, especially in some of these key Senate races, in places like South Carolina, for example, where Jamie Harrison, the Democrat, has raised nearly $60 million. Big sums of money directed by this kind of fight. So that's the biggest question. Does this start to change when we're talking about Roe v. Wade, when we're talking about health care, which is how Democrats have really tried to frame this issue? Does this become a galvanizing issue for them the way that it has successfully become for Republicans? It's what you heard from Mitch McConnell on the Senate floor tonight, saying elections have consequences. This is the result of Republicans winning elections.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Ellen Jenkins, thanks to you both. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Elaine.